Okay. So, before we actually do continue with Gene Engine, I also wanted to do kind of an offshoot. So basically, we will be doing C++ and C kind of in its own direction, and I think we're going to be doing that for hexadecimal 04, right? That would be the playlist that we're going to be using for C++, right? And then we're going to go offshoot. So what I want to do is have videos that would kind of go side by side, right? Because the game hacking and coding, you cannot wait to learn a specific point, right? You need to start learning and start doing simple coding as you're learning reversing, right? Because learning reverse engineering or learning reverse, game hacking is essentially you first have to know what are you looking for. Well, if you don't know how to code, at least the basic things, or at least how the code works, you are not going to be effective at finding the things you want. You will essentially always be in the dark. So we need to learn as we go coding. I'm not the best at it. I don't have the best background for it. But I guess we will learn together as we go. And maybe some of you will be better than me and you guys can help me out. Or some of you will actually find this useful. And what I wanted to do before we start, resources to figure out what can we do, like what books, what websites you can use to kind of help you on this journey, right? So let me move that a little bit here, like that. I think that should be okay. And then we'll go over like some things that a lot of people use. So the first one is for people who don't want to spend money, right? For the best way, if you don't want to spend money, is looking at this, learncpp.com. The reason why is it's probably the best resource you'll have for coding. It covers basically everything you'll ever need to study coding. It's a free website. It goes into examples as well. I think it even has some small questions. And essentially, this is the best way to kind of get your feet wet, right, for free. Now, there is resources that are paid, right? But I do recommend this one the most, right? For people who don't know anything about C++, who don't even know if they should get into it, start right here. Learn at least till, I would say chapter 5, right? Because now you start getting into things that are a little bit more realistic, right? You're going to be dealing with strings and constants, right? This is more about game hacking, right? So after chapter 6, chapter O, I guess, this kind of starts to be more towards what you'll be doing. So essentially, if you want to know if you want to do game hacking, at least complete to bit manipulation. At least to bit manipulation. Everything else is starting to be a little bit more specific to other things. And if you just really want to know if you like coding, finish up to chapter 5. This will tell you if you can handle it or if you really want to learn C++ and C. Best way to figure out now before you start buying books and realize you don't like it, start with this. Now, for people who want to be a little bit more, I would say, old approach with textbooks, I picked up some books. Some of these you can probably find PDFs online, but for the most part, these are paid, right? 77. These are Canadian, right? But I'm sure you can find used copies on some of these for like maybe even $10. You don't have to even do the latest versions. You can do older editions, right? They're cheaper, and for the most part, they're kind of the same all throughout. Like they will still teach you. It's just that you might have to adapt to some latest releases of C++. And to kind of also, you have to keep a note at it. You see this where it says C++ 17. So C++, like a code itself, right? It gets updated, right? Somebody wrote the way that C++ work, how it compiles. Well, you have to understand that it gets updated. Some code, for example, I think C, I don't think it gets much updates anymore, or at least not directly. I think it has some kind of updates, kind of like on an add-on type of way, but in terms of like just the code itself, it's done. It's like the way it kind of formulates the way you have to write it does not really change anymore because it's such a grandfathered code. In most situations, at least on the baseline, there's people can argue that there are some add-ons that kind of start changing it, but for the most part, it does not. Now, C++, the guy who created it, Bjorn, he still updates the code, and there's still a committee that updates C++. Now, these latest updates, you can argue are good or bad, or if they're even necessary. That is up to the community. But the idea is you should keep to almost the latest release of C++. Like currently this book talks about C++ 17. I think that means it was released in 2017. I think, if I'm not mistaken, version. So the latest one I think they have is C++ 20. Yeah, and then the 2024, or I guess it's called 23, was released this year. So long as you look for anything roughly in this range, right, that's fine, right? I don't think you shouldn't go back below. I mean, whatever you learn in 14 and 17 will be almost the same. It's actually, what happens is usually some things are easier to write, and that could be a problem for some because it's they obfuscate some things, or they change the way it kind of formats, like certain things where you would make a mistake you wouldn't, the compiler would still compile. So it really is up to your preference, but I would say if you want to keep up to date, choose 2017 or 2020. 2024 just came out. How stable or how much you want to adapt to it is up to you. Most companies won't even use. Most companies are still in 2017, like the way they write things, right? But if you want to keep to the latest and greatest, stick to 2020, right? I think that should be enough for you. Or when you look for the books, right? Look at the release versions that they cover. Like, for example, this will still work, in my opinion, at least, unless they released some new ones. So here's the guy who created it, Bjorn Ströse. And this is the first book I would say you should take a look, right? It covers basic things about how C++ works. I read the book a little bit, but it's kind of like the introductory book of it. See, it's a C++ 11, so it's a bit outdated. And for some of you, this might not be the best kind of starting point, but it's essentially like the original way how Bjorn kind of looked at C. Now, if you want to see, this is the current book that I think for the most part in universities they would cover this book. Now, worse reviews because I'm guessing there was some issues, right, to revise the book. They'll publish a new version. Unfortunately, this book contains a lot of errors. Yeah, so you got to understand, books contain errors. They're not perfect, and in terms of errors, it usually means that there's errors on like code, right? Like code might have problems with compiling or something like that, where it doesn't work universally, only works for specific compilers, right? For example, GNU compilers. There's also the C compiler. Like there's different compilers that would kind of assemble your code and make it run on your system. And I'm guessing there might have been, since it's newer, right? It just came out. There might be some dependencies that usually you shouldn't need, or right, that's why you would see a kind of lower rating. But for the most part, if you choose this book, it was all gonna be fine. Now, if you kind of just want to get your feet wet, this would be the book to start with, Tour of C++. It explains what it is, how it works, and kind of gives you a general knowledge of what to do with it. And this is a book for people who just want to get into programming. And I think it even covers the newest one, C++ 2023. Let's see. That's another one that I've seen because Packet is a company that does a lot of kind of like small books covering all these things, and I think it's worth mentioning it. Now, this is something new. I haven't seen these on the market yet, but I've heard from some that these are kind of like these packs, right? And how good they are, I don't know, but I've heard from some that they are genuinely actually handful, because they structure them in very like kind of boxy type of things, right? You learn functions, then you learn, right? Like they're not all together, which makes it easier for some people to learn. So I think if you are interested, right, and it doesn't just like it covers a lot, right? It has multiple books within it, but they package it very nicely in terms of like, okay, let's do this, let's do it like that, right? So they kind of it's a good way to structure your learning. I've noticed like a lot of people gave me good reviews on these ones. Now, how effective, depending on the release, right? C++ might be good. Like, let's say Python 3 might be good, but C++ might be, I don't know, right? It's all up to interpretation, right? And, your mileage may vary, but I do hear some good from them. So just left it here. This one we covered. I know this one, the Crash Course series. They're basically a similar thing to something like this, but this is how I kind of started some of my coding. It covers a lot of topics. The company that makes it, I think it's called No Starch. No Starch Press, is very. This is a type of book that is not for beginners. It might look like it is, but once you start reading it, you'll see that they go really quickly. They go very, very quickly in terms of how they cover C++. So for absolute beginners, I would not recommend this. This is for people who may be transitioning into this type of language, like already know perfectly like JavaScript or Java itself. And this is amazing books for that. And a really good illustration. Like, no, I'm not saying if you're new to coding, you shouldn't try these, but a lot of these crash course, they entice you. They have the first few chapters very, very basic, but they go really, really in depth once they go through that. So to some, this might be intimidating, and I don't suggest outright starting with these. I would suggest for C++ to go with this one. As you can basically search, because if you want to know the answers to this book, just go on Google and search the name of the book, right? And then search answers, and then search Git. And then usually there'll be somebody who openly kind of created code answering a lot of the questions in this book. Or in your case, right, for this videos, we're going to go through this book. And we might, if I feel like we're gonna try to see if we can like observe other books. This one we'll skip because you don't need to kind of focus on that. But this is what we're going to be doing for C++, right? The programming one, the crash course, and maybe we'll look into the other ones. And we will reference the CPP, where all this is. Right, so for people who don't want to buy the book, we will go over this as well. I'll do my best to kind of make it as open source as possible, so that you can learn without actually paying money for things that you don't need to pay money for. Now, for C, there's also something called C, right, which is the predecessor to C++, which was used back in the 1970s, 1980s. NASA had to code a lot of their stuff for C. It's perfect. It's a very good embedded language. What it means that it's very useful language compared to assembly, right? It's the next fastest way to code something in terms of performance, right? How much memory it takes up. And it's oftentimes used for embedded systems, such as controllers, microcontrollers for your cars, for drivers, for your computer, for kernel drivers, like your kernel anti-cheat is written in C. I would guess 100% that 99% of that code is in C. like 90, maybe there's, depending on firmware is sometimes written, or sorry, drivers are sometimes written in C++, but firmware and like closer to metal, right? Well, that's when they call, how close you are to the machine code. Usually the closer you get to manipulating memory as opposed to just writing variables and functions, the more you'll start using languages like C and C++ as opposed to Python or Java, or I think there's like R and F and all these Go and Kotlin, all the other languages that were created from C. Actually, Python is created from C, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But to start, this is the Bible of C. You can find this. I would not suggest, but if you search PDF, you probably can find this book on Google. That's how much available it is. And this book was written back in 1988, right? So it's not open source book, right? It's still paid, but that's basically your starting line. Go through this book. We will go together and we'll do it because it's required for a lot of the driver development. My personal favorite. I wanted to kind of get a book and never went through this one yet, but I've seen some of the pages in it and it looks about alright. C23. This, maybe we'll go into this, depending on how far, right? Writing your own compiler for C, right? So you can understand how basically this will teach you when you finish your writing your code, how does it even works, right? Like how does it get converted that your machine understands it, right? So this is an effective way after we're done learning very well C, right? And then once we get good at the basics and fundamentals, we have to actually learn how to write algorithms. Algorithms are things like that, like when you search for something, when you try to find something, when you try to calculate something quickly or store data quickly or do some matrix, complex math, you need to learn how to do algorithms. Because if you just do it with like the brute force method, it will always be slow, right? You'll always have problems. So you need to learn some of the basic algorithms, right? And we'll go into that, of course, to kind of facilitate and make your code run faster, more reliable, and take up less memory, right? Memory would be more like data structures, right? How you would structure your data. Right, so there's two sides of it. There's algorithms and there's data structures. Now, once you learn, right, there's another book. I believe this one uses Java. So it uses a language similar to C, but it's not C++. One of these uses Java. I forgot. I think it's this one. But trying to find let's see. A lot of these books are actually pseudocode, so they would write code without it. Double check which language it uses, but we can still use these. When we start, I'll pick which one is the best. But I think these are Java specific, but we can adapt it to C++ and C. Here's a book I just found. So when you search for, if you want to have your own resource, look for add the tag C++ or C so that you know what you're using, right? Similar with this, data structures and algorithms. Data structures is how you store something, how you store memory and your variables, and algorithms is how you search through them or find it or assign things quickly, right? Another book for it, Secure Coding in C++. Now, this is something for if you want to create, on the other end, to protect your code, right? This is an effective way. This book has been around, and if you ever get into security and you're trying to secure code for drivers or embedded systems, right? It's to prevent people from looking into the code or hacking anything that when it's running right on your system, you will need to do this. So this is actually good for game developers who want to create anti-cheats rather than people who want to break them. But if you know how to secure it, you probably know how, or at least have an idea of where to start, how to break it. Right? Clean architecture and clean code. This is just an extra read. These are good books to kind of let you give a bigger picture how you should code, how you should structure it so that it's not messy and it's easy and organized. Now, these are not the best methods, but at least it'll give you an idea of what you should be focusing on. If, for example, sometimes this is not the best method, right? Sometimes you want a different approach to things, and a lot of times people kind of judge this book for some mistakes. But in your case, I think you'll be fine. Okay, I think that's it for the start, and then we'll go into C and C++ in the next video, or at least what you should be doing to kind of get your environment ready. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.